If you feel like you can't keep up with Ohio's EVV rules, you're definitely not alone. Over the last few months, we've had proposed rules from Ohio Medicaid, we've had Senate Bill 315 moving through the legislature, and depending on when you looked, you probably got a different answer about what was actually changing. Now that SB 315 has officially been signed by the governor, we're finally starting to get a clearer picture. But here's the thing. Some agencies are already changing the way they operate because they think all of these updates are final and in effect today, which isn't actually true. So in this video, I want to walk through what changed, what hasn't changed, and most importantly, what your agency should be doing right now. First off, why has this been so confusing? The easiest way to understand everything that's happened is to realize that there were two completely separate actions happening at the same time. On one side, Ohio Medicaid released a proposed rule. Think of that as their wish list of EVV changes. On the other side, the legislature was working on Senate Bill 315, which included a lot of things, but EVV was a big change. That bill has now been signed into law. The problem is, these two didn't always agree with each other. In fact, in a lot of places, they actually contradicted each other. So now Ohio Medicaid has to go back and revise part of its proposed rule so that it matches the new law that was just passed. That's why everyone has been hearing different things. So let's talk about the biggest changes. The first one affects a lot of providers, live-in caregivers. Before all of this started, live-in caregivers were generally exempt from EVV. Then, Ohio Medicaid proposed removing that exemption completely. So providers were thinking, okay, everyone is going to have to use EVV now. But that's not what ultimately ended up happening. SB 315 landed somewhere in the middle. Live-in family caregivers are still expected to use EVV, but they won't have to actually capture GPS location, which is a pretty big distinction. Instead of eliminating the exemption entirely, the bill basically says, we still want visit verification, we just don't necessarily need GPS collected from these caregivers. And speaking of GPS, it's still definitely becoming more important. GPS has probably created more questions than anything else. And if you worked in Ohio for a while, you know providers have had to collect consent before GPS could be used. Now, Ohio is clearly moving towards making GPS the standard for almost everyone. The biggest exception is those qualifying live-in family caregivers we just talked about. So if you're thinking, can I ignore GPS because of SB 315? The answer is probably no. GPS is still a major part of EVV moving forward. There are just a few specific exceptions. Another place where the proposed rule and the final bill went in completely different directions is daily rate services. Ohio Medicaid wanted to expand EVV into additional daily rate services, things like structured family caregiving and shared living services. But SB 315 ended up pulling a lot of those back out. So if your agency bills daily rate or residential services, don't automatically assume they'll now require EVV. The final law excludes many of them as long as federal rules allow it. And something else to keep in mind, Ohio is going to be watching much more closely. This is the part I think agencies should really pay attention to. SB 315 isn't about changing who uses EVV, it's also about using EVV data more effectively. Ohio is now going to be publishing much more information about compliance. Things like manual entries, modified visits, claim matching, denials, payment trends, and just overall compliance, which is actually good news. Providers are going to have a much better understanding of where they stand when it comes to compliance. But on the other hand, it also tells us something else. Ohio tends to rely on EVV data much more heavily moving forward. All right, so what should you actually be doing with all of this information? Regardless of when every rule takes effect, good EVV habits are never wasted. First, stop touching your visits. Don't touch visits unless you absolutely have to. Every manual edit, manual entry, and just change in general creates another data point that can be used against you in an audit. If nothing actually needs to be corrected, just leave it alone. Bill what actually happened and not what was supposed to happen, which actually leads right into another really important point. Build the shift, not the calendar. If a caregiver worked not exactly within what their scheduled time was, that's what happened. Don't adjust it just to match what was on the schedule. Your documentation should always match the care that was actually delivered. Next tip, watch your compliance reports. Don't wait for Ohio or an auditor to tell you that there's a problem. Pull your same data compliance reports regularly. Look for caregivers with excessive manual entries, visits that aren't transmitting correctly, and just patterns in general. Most compliance issues don't appear overnight, they develop slowly. So if you're reviewing your reports consistently, you'll usually catch these trends before they become big billing problems. Next, your caregivers need to buy in. At the end of the day, the best software in the world can't make someone clock in. Your caregivers have to understand that EVV isn't optional. If someone consistently forgets to clock in and out, coach them and retrain them and set clear expectations. But if someone repeatedly refuses to follow the process, you might have to make some difficult decisions. Eventually, those habits become your compliance risk, so keep that in mind. All right, our last recommendation is to verify what's actually happening. If something in your data looks strange, go investigate. If a caregiver has an unusual pattern, check on it. You can drop into visits. If GPS doesn't seem right, look into it. Finding those issues yourself is always better than having an auditor find them first. So what happens next? The biggest takeaway is that SB 315 is law, but Ohio Medicaid still has a lot of work to do on this. They're going to have to revise or withdraw portions of the proposed rule so that everything lines up and an official bill will be published eventually. So we should be expecting more guidance over the coming months. Until then, don't jump the gun. Continue following the current Ohio Medicaid requirements until official implementation guidance is released. And in the meantime, focus on cleaning up your EVV processes because no matter what the final rule looks like, those are improvements your agency will benefit from anyway. If this video helped you understand what's changing, be sure to like the video and subscribe for more updates. And if you have questions about your agency's EVV setup or billing process, we've got links in the description where you can connect with our team. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.